ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste, my dear friends. This is third video on Swami Ramsukhdas Ji Maharaj, a God realized soul. His advice to his devotees to adopt sadhanas to get self realization and finally achieving liberation from the cycle of birth and death. I start this video with the topic God is one's own. In fact, no person is an orphan because everyone has got patronage. How can a man be without any owner when every worldly object is owned by someone or the other? God, who is the master of the entire universe, is also our master. It is up to us whether we regard and know him as our master or not. But he knows that we are his. So it is a blunder on our part if we assume ourselves as orphans while God is ever present as our patron. Why does a man feel that he is an orphan? He assumes a relationship with objects and individuals. When there is their separation, he feels himself as an orphan. It is a rule that a man forgets his real master when he himself becomes a master of persons and things. For example, a male child cannot live without his mother, but when he grows up and gets married, he regards the wife and sons as his own and starts showing indifference to his mother. Therefore, Lord Krishna in the Gita has called the embodied soul as Isvara, Lord, as it has assumed the body as its own and itself as the master of the body. The Lord declares, the Lord Jivatma or the embodied soul obtains a body and leaves it. Gita chapter 15, Sloka 8. If a man starts regarding no one else except God as his own, he will realize that his assumption of being an orphan is wrong and he is under the patronage of God. In fact, God was ours, will remain ours, and at present is also ours, while the world can never be ours because the world is constantly separating from us and it cannot live with us, though it appears to be with us. But God is ours whether we attain Him or not. The reason is that ours is He who ever lives with us and who can never separate from us. It is a matter of great surprise that the relative whom we assume as our own passes away, but the relationship with Him subsists. For example, a woman became a widow several years ago, but if she is called as Mr. A's wife, she becomes alert even today. Thus, her relationship with her husband still persists. Here, a doubt arises how a son will offer oblation to his dead father, as is sanctioned by the scriptures, if he does not continue his affinity for him. The answer is that the assumed affinity for selfish motive and for enjoyment of pleasure leads to bondage. But if it is to pay debt and to render selfless service to others, it frees us from bondage. A debtor and a malefactor cannot attain salvation easily. If a person suffers for his evil deeds or he performs virtuous deeds such as offering of charity, etc., his sins are destroyed, but his debt and guilt still persist. He can be free from the debt and the guilt only if the creditor and the offended forgive him. Originally, a man becomes a debtor, a slave, an orphan, a mean and a degraded fellow only when he assumes his affinity for the world. But he who assumes none as his own in the world cannot be a debtor and a malefactor, because debt and guilt cannot exist without base. Mula bhave kutah sakha. In the absence of root, there can't be any branch. If things seem to be ours, it means that they are ours only in order to be utilized for the service of others. Similarly, if relatives seem to be ours, it means that they are ours only in order to render them selfless service without expecting any return. Nothing is ours for our, for our own sake. If we regard them as ours for our selfish motive, we shall be ensnared in the cycle of birth and death. The Lord declares attachment of the soul to the modes is the cause of its birth in good and evil forms. Gita chapter 13, stanza 21. He who regards anything as his own gains nothing, while he who regards nothing as his own attains everything, which God. Without misusing things, if we put them to the best use according to our knowledge and power, our assumed affinity for those things is cut asunder, and if we render selfless service to other persons, our assumed affinity for those persons dissolves. Freedom from this assumed affinity leads to liberation. Now, a question arises: why liberated souls, being free from such assumed affinity, remain engaged in the welfare of others? The answer is that they remained engrossed in the welfare of others during the stage of their spiritual discipline. Gita chapter 2 stanza 25 and chapter 12 stanza 4. So now also they act according to their nature, though nothing is to be done, to be known, and to be attained by them, as the Lord declares, even a liberated man acts according to his own nature. Gita chapter 3 stanza 33. It means that by remaining engrossed in the welfare of others, their affinity for the world is completely detached, and therefore they have not to work for the welfare of others. Rather, the welfare of others becomes their spontaneous activity. Accepting God, whatever we regard as ours, becomes polluted because it is the sense of mindness which is filled pollution. Let the field of mindness be burnt. Mansa chapter 7 stanza 117a. Not only this, but by regarding the persons as our own, we want to become their master, but in fact we become their slaves. We want to set them right, but in fact they are set wrong. By doing so, we defile our body, senses, mind, intellect, ego, wife, sons, family, riches, and property, etc., and create an obstacle to their improvement. But if we don't regard them as our ours, they are purified by God's power and become uncommon as God's gift, because in reality they belong only to God. If we regard an object as ours, it becomes polluted and we become orphans and slaves. But if we don't regard it as ours, it is purified and we are patronized and liberated. Quest for truth and self realization. Next topic. The goal of quest is to know the self and the world rather than God. We are inquisitive when our knowledge is imperfect. We know something, but we don't know something. It means a man being proud of his knowledge by regarding it as perfect becomes an atheist, but being dissatisfied with his imperfect knowledge and having the feeling that he lacks knowledge, he becomes inquisitive. We have no inquisitiveness about the topic which is either not known at all or which is perfectly known and realized. God is totally unknown to us, and so he is not within the limit of inquisitiveness or thought, but is a matter of faith. We have no perfect knowledge of the self and the world. I am and the world is. This much we know. But what I am and what the world is, this we don't know in reality. So I, the self, and the world are Subject of inquisitiveness. In the scriptures, God is also said to be a subject of knowledge, Jagat Jiva Paramatmanam. But it is so only for those who have faith in the scriptures and in liberated souls, in Vedic literature and in saints' utterances. God is described. It is because of this description that people develop inquisitiveness for God. It means that those who have faith in the scriptures and saints and have heard of God from them but have no such realization inquire about Him. Contrary to them are those who have no such inquisitiveness. But as far as inquisitiveness about the self and the world is concerned, that can be equally perceived in believers and non believers because all people realize I am and the world is. But such realization about God is not there. Therefore, God becomes a matter of faith for them. Thus, there are two classes of people, believers or non believers, and two schools of philosophy, theism and atheism. In an inquisitive person, by thinking I am inquisitive, egotism, which individuality persists. So long as ego lasts, he acquires a lot of learning but does not have self realization. But intense quest causes restlessness in him. He thinks, I have known so much, yet there is not much improvement, and I have gained no singularity. I still come under the sway of attachment and aversion, desirability and undesirability, and joys and sorrows. Such restlessness eats away his ego, only pure inquisitiveness remains, and that pure inquisitiveness turns into self realization. With this realization, relationship with Prakriti, nature, and its evolutes totally vanish, and the effulgent self remains as it is. Here it is imperative to know that only the insentient objects can be the subject of knowledge. The sentient can't be the subject of knowledge at as it itself is an embodiment of knowledge. By attaching higher value to the insentient objects, we could not realize the sentient one. Having realized him, we lose our own identity, and there is one self realization, effacement of egoism, and God realization. When a man realizes non existence of all places, time, actions, articles, states, incidents, and circumstances, etc., only God exists. The self itself inheres God. Therefore, God is neither distinct from us nor are we distinct from Him. He is neither far from us nor are we far from Him. He is neither without us nor are we without Him. He, he can't desert us nor can we desert Him. He is all the illuminator, base, sport, preserver, creator, knower, and lovable of all. He is known as the inner soul, the spectator of the self, and the universal soul, etc. No one is incapable of, dependent, and undeserving in realizing Him who is ever realized. He can be realized only by having an intense desire. If we insist on particular doctrine of philosophy such as dualism or non-dualism or spatial non-dualism, etc., it proves to be a stumbling block to God realization because God is one and the same for all. He who insists on his own sect is a sectarian, and a sectarian cannot judge correctly. Saints declare. There remains a difference in philosophical doctrines so long as egoism lingers in the aspirant. Egoism gives rise to individualism, while individualism gives rise to dualism. Therefore, as long as egoism persists, differences cannot vanish. But when egoism vanishes, all differences perish and only God remains. What is egoism? Let us think over it. In the Gita, Lord Krishna declares, egoism thus is my prakriti, nature, divided eightfold. Gita chapter 7, stanza 4. The five subtle elements, ego, intellect, and also the unmanifested nature. Gita chapter 13, stanza 5. In Sankhya Karika also there is mention of egoism. Parkartar Mahan Tato Ham Karaha. In Srimad Bhagavat there is mention of three kinds of egoism. Sattvika of the mode of goodness, Rajasa of the mode of passion, and Tamsa of the mode of ignorance. All egos mentioned above are parts of insentient nature matter. मतवादी जाने नहीं तत्वादी की बात, सूरज उगा उल्लुआ गिने अंधेरी रात, हरिया तत् विचार्य क्या मत सेती काम, तत् बसाया अमरपुर मत का जमपुर धाम, हरिया रत्ता तत्व का मत का रत्ता नाही, मत का रत्ता से फिरे ता तत् पाया नहीं. A sectarian cannot understand the topic of self-realization, God realization, explained by a metaphysician in the same way as an owl cannot see daylight. Saint Haridasa declares that an aspirant, instead of getting entangled in any sect, should think of God realization because the thought of God realization leads to immortality, while insistence on a sect leads to health. He who insists on a sect cannot realize God. All egos mentioned above are parts of insentient nature, matter. Therefore, God has described ego as distinct from the self as ahankara ityam. Gita chapter 7 stanza 4. Apra iyam. Gita chapter 7 stanza 5 and etad yo veti. Gita chapter 17 stanza 1. It means that ego is that which is to be illumined and known, while God is the illuminator and the knower. Therefore, the illumined and the illuminator, or the known and the knower, can never be identical. A man, by identifying the self with ego, holds I am in I am. I is a fragment of Prakriti, nature, while am is a fragment of God is. It means that I has its identity with not the whole non-existent matter, while M has its identity with is. It is called M because of its relationship with I. If it M renounces this relationship with I, it will not remain M, but it will remain is. That is God. When a person accepts the egoistic notion in him, in the self, by ignorance, modifications such as insentience, individualism, uneven mindedness, feeling of lack, disquietude, doership and enjoyership, etc., emanate. Therefore, in order to wipe out this assumed egoistic notion, a person has to accept divinity is in himself, because in divinity there is no egoism. When a man identifies the self with the ego, he distinguishes between I, you, this and that. But when he ceases to have this identification, I, you, this and that will vanish, but only their illuminator is. God will remain. In is all these four are not there. When egoism vanishes, he becomes totally free from evils such as individualism and uneven mindedness, etc. Acceptance of divinity in the self does not nourish dualism, rather, it shatters it, because by accepting divinity in the self, egoism vanishes. When there is no egoism, then how can modifications or evils born of egoism subsist? In order to wipe out egoism, either accept existence of is in place of am, or merge am into is, omnipresent God. By doing so, egoism will disappear, which I, you, this and that will disappear, only is will exist. As whether a knife falls on a melon or a melon falls on a knife, it is the melon which is cut. So is the case with is and am, whether is merged into am or am is merged into is. It is only am, individualism, which will vanish and is will remain. It is better to merge am into is than to merge is into am, because am has already got the impressions of egoistic notion, individualism. So the egoistic notion does not vanish quickly. Therefore, instead of getting established in the self, it is better to take refuge in God, who is everyone's own. No one except God can be our own, because in fact our own can be only He, who can never separate from us, and we can never separate from Him. He who sometimes joins us and sometimes separates from us cannot be ours. When the self, turning its back from egoism, surrenders to God, who is one's own, which he accepts, I am only God's, and I am not of anyone else in the least. He crosses the divine illusion, lower nature, with his egoism totally annihilated. Those who take refuge in me cross the divine illusion of mind. Gita chapter 7 stanza 14. It means that if a man gets established in the self, there is possibility of the trace of egoism to persist. But when a man takes refuge in God, his egoism totally vanishes, because it is God Himself. He who shatters egoism of the devotee who takes refuge in Him. Those devotees who have predominance of discrimination depend on God by renouncing dependence on egoism, which by renouncing the world. But those devotees who, instead of having predominance of discrimination, have faith in God, depend on God with their egoism as they are, God Himself shatters egoism of such devotees. तेषं सतातया कुत्नाम भजन्तं प्रीतिपूर्वकम् अदामि बुद्ध्यागम तं येन ममुपायन्ति ते तेषामेव वनुक् पर्था महाजन्मजन्नास्या मया मा भावास्थो ज्ञानादीपेन भावसत्ता. Gita chapter 10 stanza 11 and 10 and 11. To them ever devout worshipping me with love, I confer that yoga of wisdom, equanimity, by which they attain me. In order to shower my grace on them, I, dwelling in their hearts, destroy the ignorance, burn darkness by the luminous lamp of wisdom. With the dying out of egoism, place, time, and actions go into naught. Only is the real remains. The knower does not remain, knowledge, self, tattva remains. Joys and sorrows don't remain. Bliss remains which only divinity in the form of truth, consciousness, bliss, solidified remains which in the Gita has been declared all is God. Chapter 7, stanza 19. That divinity prevails everywhere, all the time, in all actions, etc., but is beyond place, time, and actions, etc. If anyone performs actions in order to attain that divinity, it means that he is trying to be separate from that divinity. The reason is that performance of actions involves doership. Hence, divinity remains unattained. Similarly, self-thinking does not lead to self-realization because by self-thinking the thinker exists and matter contrary to spirit exists. A person tries to attain the divinity only when he thinks that it is unattained and he tries to renounce the matter and to reflect on the self only when he accepts the existence of matter. If we try to know that divinity, it means that we are far from it, because if we want to know it, it means that it is the object to be known. But the fact is that divinity is the knower rather than the object to be known. No one can be the knower of the knower of all in the same way as we can see all objects with the eye, but we cannot see the eye with the eye because the power of vision is not an object of senses. Therefore, that divinity alone is the knower of divinity itself. Arjuna says to Lord Krishna, you know, you alone know yourself by yourself, O Supreme Person. Gita chapter 10, stanza 15. Saint Tulsidas in the Mansa declares, विषय करण सुर जीव समेता सकल एकते एक सचेता सब कर परम प्रकाशक जोई राम अनादि अवधपति सोई. The objects of senses are illumined by senses. Senses are illumined by the gods of senses. The gods of senses are illumined by the self. But the supreme illuminator of all is the beginningless, absolute Lord Rama, who is now the king of Ayodhya. We can't think and reflect on divinity without the aid of the evolutes of nature. If we think or reflect on it, the mind or the faculty of reflection remains with us. If we decide, intellect remains with us, while seeing, hearing, and speaking, eyes, ears, and tongue respectively remain with us. Similarly, if we assume the existence of is, assumption, and the individuality of the person who assumes remain. If we negate not the unreal, the individuality of the person who negates last. If we renounce the sense of doership, I am not a doer, this egoism in its subtle form persists, with individuality of the person who renounces remains. Therefore, we should neither make assumptions nor negate nor renounce, but remain calm and quiet from within and without by being established in his divinity. We should also not have this insistence that we have to be calm and quiet, because by doing so, the sense of doership will usurp. In fact, the state of quietness is spontaneous. If we renounce the notion of I, you, this and that, only is the real remains. We should remain established in that is without thinking of anything else. Lord Krishna in the Gita declares an aspirant having a firm resolve that only God exists everywhere should think of nothing else. Gita chapter 6 stanza 25. If any thought comes to the mind, we should have neither attachment nor aversion to it. We should feel neither pleased nor displeased, neither take it as good nor bad. We should neither take it as our own, nor should we accept it in our own self. We should become quite indifferent to it. In fact, it is not in us. Attachment and aversion is a pair of opposites. This pair of opposites is the main stumbling block to God realization. Lord Krishna declares attachment and aversion are the way layers. Gita chapter 3 stanza 34. In this way, if we become quiet from within and from without by being established in God, even for a second or two, it develops such a power which destroys the taste for contact, born pleasures, and also for attachment to the world. The reason is that in actionless divinity there is unlimited power. All powers emanate from that actionless divinity is. They exist in it and also merge into it. In the world, after every activity, there is the state of inactivity which replenishes that power. For example, when we get exhausted by speaking continuously, we remain quiet for some time and thus regain power to speak. We feel fatigued by walking continuously and having rested for some time, regain energy for walking. By working hard throughout the day, we feel tired, but by sleeping, we regain energy and are refreshed. Thus, when one physical or mental activity is over and other begins, in between the two there is actionless divinity. सब व्यर्थी हैं गोपिका साक्षी कृष्ण स्वरूप संधि में झलकत रहे यह है रास अनूप. All mental activities are coordinates. All mental activities are cowardices, while Lord Krishna stands witness as between the two cowardices, Lord Krishna is visible. Similarly, between the two activities, the self shines. Thus we get unique bliss. If we become quiet in that actionless divinity, we shall realize that self-evident divinity. In fact, the state of quietness is innate, axiomatic, and natural. It needs no effort. Mere awareness of the non-existence of material objects should be there. At this stage, I complete this video. Next video number 4, I will start with the topic divinity beyond the ken of instruments. Thank you for watching this video. Namaskar, my dear friends. Namaste.